Hello and welcome to another episode of the Frankly Leader podcast. A deep amount of gratitude and also loads of excitement for this conversation, particularly to be having it with you specifically. So Kayleigh, thank you for giving up your time and coming to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation too, and I feel very, very honoured that you've asked me to come on. So thank you.
We are going to talk today about a really important topic that has been around for quite a long time and it keeps surfacing and not going away. But we're here to talk about burnout.
Yes.
Which is, as you know, a topic close to my heart. So for people that don't know you, Kayleigh Basford is a coach and transformation consultant and she runs her own business. But Kayleigh, tell our listeners what time of year it is and what is going on where you live right now.
Yes, thank you. So it is currently the beginning of March and I am living in Doha in Qatar, which around a week ago was our 6-month anniversary of being here. And my husband's been here for a couple of years, who Jen knows. And unfortunately, about 3 or 4 days ago, a war broke out in what's called the GCC, so the Gulf region. And so right now we are just sitting in our houses, hoping that it all de-escalates very soon. It is definitely stressful, but this is also a welcome thing to still carry on with, just to have a conversation about how burnout can manifest itself. And ultimately it comes from stress and anxiety. And I'm in a slightly anxious and stressful situation right now. So for me, it's probably useful. So that's why I wanted to go ahead despite what's going on.
So we're going to take really good care of each other, but particularly you in this conversation. Yeah. And I think I said to you when we came on, I'm like, well, wow, all the training that you've done and also all of your life's experiences that I know you have handled with such grace and dignity have given you probably the most amount of resources and resilience to be able to handle the situation that you're currently in at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. When you said that before we started, hit record, I thought, good point, because it's true. I'm trained for this stuff. And that's probably the biggest thing, actually, is giving yourself a bit of a break. And I'm sure we'll come on to that in a while.
We will. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do now and what do you love about it?
Thank you. I spent around 22 years in the corporate world. I literally grew up in it. I was 18 when I started in a little old phone shop and then worked my way through. And at the end of it, I worked for a few multinational blue chips. I ended up being in kind of transformation and things like digital transformation, data, customer experience. But the bit that I loved about it was the hearts and minds piece. So actually the transformation of the people, because without that, you don't get a transformation of a business. And so for me, what I do now is kind of threefold. So the first thing is around that transformation consultancy. I can still use a lot of the skills that I had being in transformation in the corporate world, and that's where I tend to do a lot of my work with clients. But then I also do leadership and development and leadership transformation, because for me, the two go hand in hand. And we know from lots of empirical research that you're more likely to have a transformation succeed if you've also got that leadership transformation going on at the same time. And conversely, it's more likely to fail. And then the last thing I do is I'm a coach. So I'm a senior coach practitioner and I do lots of one-to-one coaching.
I think that's always been the thing that's really united you and I, like our curiosity about psychology and humans, but a passion for people. And then no surprise that you've ended up in people transformation on the other side.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we were discussing before this, I'm also trying to do my master's in neuroscience and psychology at the moment. So again, we were saying, oh, we love to learn before this. But talking about the pain of learning and being a mum and then also working and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's something that I'm passionate about. Like what I love about my job, even when I was a leader, and I was a leader for many years, it was about the people for me. And it was about, surrounding yourself with people that are better than you and then facilitating their, experience and for them to shine. And I guess where I've moved on to these days is thinking about how can I help other people do that? Because we know.
Yeah, and we know there's a real need as well because a lot of organisations aren't doing it, are they? Yeah.
Well, it's a brilliant actual segue into burnout, really, that comment.
Tell us about the biggest challenge that leaders are facing at the moment that being more burnout mindful will help them with.
Yeah, so I mean, I've done a lot of research into this because I talk about burnout quite a lot. And for me, there's some huge challenges for leaders. So we're seeing that burnout is on the rise, not just in the UK. There's lots of evidence. If anyone wants to read it, read the Burnout Report by Mental Health UK. They do it every year and you can see the trends. So we're seeing burnout as a continual challenge that is becoming more and more of an issue. It's an issue for leaders because they're one of the groups that's most likely to be affected by burnout. It's also an issue for them because we're seeing Gen Z as the other group that's more likely to have burnout. And we can come on to why for all three groups. And then there's the third group, which is women. So we're seeing for leaders a big challenge, which is how do they manage this situation of burnout and how do they manage their own experience of burnout? What we've seen since the pandemic is the expectation on leaders has risen by their teams, and the execs have got rising expectations as well. And that has created kind of the perfect storm of burnout experience for a lot of leaders, not to mention the fact that they're actually trying to solve burnout.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much I want to pick up in there. One theme that was coming out is how often I say to leaders, put your oxygen mask on first. The perception that people have about the role of being a leader and what you're therefore responsible for. And I think this word responsibility is quite key. Like, who is responsible for what means that the weight of all that creates a significant amount of stress and expectation, but a lot of it is self-created. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think resources is a challenge. What we know is that less than half of all leaders, this is a global stat, are not trained. And so, the putting the time, the effort and the resource into training leaders really does equip them with what they need to support. So to your point around putting on their own oxygen mask, things like training is a form of that, knowing, well, how do I deal with people? How do I deal with this situation? And then there's the actual individual things that you can do to put on your own oxygen mask. But for leaders, not more than any other group, but as well as other groups, really need to consider that. I think the only thing I will say is that's an interesting bit of insight that I've seen, and this is again from the Burnout report, is what we do know is leaders, when you look at the way that the Burnout report asks questions of leaders, they are technically under more pressure than Gen Zs. And and particularly women, they're about 13% more likely to have burnout symptoms than men. And that may be because they report it, or it may be because they're experiencing it. I err on the side of it's more likely that they're experiencing it because of the extra at-home thinking they're expected to do, which I'm sure you can imagine is the case. But what we're seeing with Gen Zs is they are burning out quicker than people who are in leadership positions with less stress. So we can see leaders have got this stress and they are burning out, and Gen Z are going quicker with less stress. So not only have we got leaders that are burning out, but we've got the next generation of leaders that don't necessarily have what they need to deal with the pressure of being a leader. And whether we like it or not, they are the next generation of leaders.
Yes. So how do we prepare them well? And you've touched on women there.
It's about society. So if my son is ill, I get the phone call.
Yeah.
If there's something to be organised, I get the text to say, do you want to come for dinner? As much as that's a lovely thing, it is me that has to take time out of my day to talk to the school, to reply. And so for me, those stats around women being burnt out more than men in no way surprised me as a woman. And I think that a mental load is a real thing, and it has an emotional and a physical impact on women.
Definitely. I love that you've broken it out into these three categories of people that are the three that are most susceptible at the moment. And is there more to say about how it might be showing up different in these three groups?
So the signs out of burnout are similar across the board. So you've kind of got emotional, mental and physical, and they can be anything from feeling like you can't concentrate, procrastination, from the kind of symptoms point of view, raised heart rates, gastrointestinal issues, breathing problems, feeling irritable. I could go off and off and off on what they are. So that the symptoms of burnout are pretty similar across the board. I think the cause is probably different across the board. And we've touched on women. I think for leaders, it's more around, from what I'm seeing and from the evidence and the research I'm doing and my own experience, actually, it's more around the organisation and how that has been designed, as well as things like training. So if you're in an organisation where you don't have things like psychological safety, or you don't have clear roles and responsibilities, that won't just affect leaders, that will affect everybody. But in particular, it can affect leaders, because if you don't know what you are responsible for, that can be horrific. If you don't have any autonomy, that also has a huge impact on leaders. So not knowing what you're responsible for, and then not having any control over your life. And again, this isn't just leaders, I just want to point that out. But the higher up you go, the more ambiguous your role gets. And I really remember saying that to people when I was mentoring them back in the corporate world. I always used to see people struggle when they went from a certain level to another level, because the jump becomes, you're not being told what to do. You've got to start deciding what you do. You've got to lay down the plan. You've got to do the strategy. And that does come naturally to some people, but to other people it doesn't, and that's where the training comes in. The other thing I would say that affects people is things like not having a coaching culture. We do know that organisations that have a coaching culture are more likely to have engaged employees, and engaged employees are more likely to deliver results. So we know that's a fact. You go to any of the big four, they'll tell you that. So engagement is almost the opposite of burnout. And so for leaders, I think it's a multifaceted thing that's happening right now, which is the lack of training, the lack of organisational design, thinking of burnout as primary care, as opposed to there's a leader over there and I think they're a hypo, I'm going to put them on a hypo course. And then you get a select sort of elite few that get to go on these very expensive courses. I think we need to change the way we think about leadership and burnout around duty of care. And actually some of the things that give you a high performance leader is also primary care against them and their teams burning out.
I often find with clients, they've got promoted into a leadership position that they didn't ask for, and suddenly they're going, oh, I don't know how to do it. Certainly with my own experience of burnout. And I was thinking about that for me, not least, I didn't have the awareness that I was working as hard as I was at the time. But the root cause of part of why I ended up with burnout was the lack of clarity around roles. So I was doing a consultancy role at the time, I don't know if you remember, and we had a fantastically competitive department, and there were two teams, the team I was in and another team, and we were supposed to work together, but it was like we were in competition because our roles overlapped, and it was murky and horrible and territorial and difficult relationships to navigate, and a lot of effort went into trying to find a way through that. Never really managed it. And then I was with an external client as a consultant to them that they didn't want. They wanted something completely different. I was just someone in the middle of it all, trying to please everybody, trying to do a good job and trying not to get caught up in tricky dynamics. Oh my God, I'm exhausted just thinking about it. I mean, it was awful.
It is a fact that if you've got the skills of a leader, that your business bottom line is going to be better with that throughout your business. But I think that your story is a story I hear time and time again, and a story that I've experienced. So I've had burnout too. I ended up having quite a few months off work with burnout. And I just want to point out that burnout isn't something that's made up. It has a huge impact on your nervous system, but your nervous system stops working. Well, actually, your nervous system does exactly what it was designed to do, but the challenge of our nervous system is it's still thinking we're wandering around the Serengeti, and we're not.
Waiting for a lion.
We've got things. Exactly. We're getting data thrown at us, and by data I mean information, by so many different sources now. You've got AI that's making us worry about things like our jobs and stuff like that. So all of this information requires processing, and it's exhausting if you're getting all of that data being thrown at you. So as a leader, I think there is some across the globe, again, we're seeing the expectation on leaders just rising and rising without the training. And to your point around then having unclear roles and responsibilities, you can't start creating an environment where psychological safety is systematically being eroded. And then that has a huge psychological impact on us as employees. It has a psychological impact on us because we don't feel safe, and that triggers our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. But also there's other elements such as turning up to work and pretending to feel a thing that you're not feeling. So pretending to feel like, oh, I'm in control or everything's fine. And then when you're not feeling like that inside, really, it depletes us. It depletes our psychological and emotional resources. And that then starts to escalate. So there's many factors that cause burnout for leaders. And we've just mentioned just a few of them, I think.
I mean, there's a massive list, isn't there? A massive list. So we've talked about two of the groups in a little bit more detail. I want to make sure Gen Z don't get missed out, because I'm really curious that we've got this situation. So tell us a bit more about what's going on for them and how they ended up here. What can we do to support them?
There's definitely lots we can do to help, or all three groups can do to help themselves and help each other. I think for Gen Z, it's a really interesting conversation. I think it's very important we point out that if someone's a Gen Z, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to get burnout, because everyone has different experiences in life. That said, we are seeing a pattern, and it's not just a UK pattern. Again, this is across the globe. We're seeing, when you look at different empirical surveys that are done, we're seeing Gen Zs are burning out at a kind of lower point than other generations. So if we just take the UK, for example, around 1 in 4 of 18 to 24-year-olds have reported taking time off work due to mental health and trying to get NHS support, versus 1 in 10, 55 and above.
Right.
So it's a very different stat. Now, some of that could be that they're more likely, their boundaries are different.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the case. I think what we're seeing is they are experiencing the symptoms of burnout earlier than we potentially did. Now, the schools of thinking as to why, there is no definitive answer here. But what I think from what I've learned and what I've researched is there's 3 major reasons why. So the first one is probably fairly obvious, which is this is the first group of people to grow up really as digital natives. So I think I'm called I know what I'm called actually. I'm called a geriatric millennial, which is awful. And I think you're an X. So yeah, so as a geriatric millennial and as you as an X, we've had our foot in one camp where we can remember not growing up with that type of technology. And now we've got it. They've never had an experience. Well, that's not the case. Now, technology isn't necessarily the challenge here. Social media is. So social media, as we know, creates dopamine. It's addictive. It can really cause problems with self-worth. Someone's on here and they're already, got a Ferrari and driving around, Dubai. Well, they're not at the moment. And, we kind of think, why haven't I got that? So you can start to get these self-worth challenges. Not to mention, it doesn't actually fit into what I'm going to talk about later, hopefully, which is rest and digest. So although it might feel like you're relaxing and going on social media and scrolling, you're not really giving your brain time to relax. You're taking an awful lot more data.
And playing havoc with your chemicals in your body, right? So
exactly. So your dopamine
is chemical.
Yeah, exactly. So you're giving yourself an imbalance. It's addictive. This is why we're starting to see different countries ban it. So you've got this generation that have experienced that, which can cause problems with dopamine levels, that sort of thing, with addiction. I'm not saying it's completely addictive. Obviously, we need more research into it, but suggestions are that it is. If anyone hasn't read Dopamine Nation, it's a really good book. It talks about that a lot. So we've got self-esteem challenges with going on social media. So we've kind of got that as our first bucket. The next bucket is, for me, probably the most important one, I think, which is the generation that have brought up this generation have had different tactics to how, say, you and I were brought up. And again, that's not a done deal. There'll be lots of everyone parents in different ways. But what we've seen more of a trend towards as society, certainly in the West, is helicopter parenting. And those who don't know what helicopter parenting is, it's where you're buzzing around your kids and trying to, don't do that, be careful, darling. Yeah, exactly. Whereas when I was a kid, and I'm sure it's the same for when you were, I went out to play and I kind of came back in for a drink and then I went back out.
Yeah, you were kicked out sometimes.
Exactly. And it was, are you in or out? Are you in or out? They sort of stop slamming the door. And so what you were learning by that experience, whether right or wrong, is you were learning things like risk, and you're starting to form neural pathways in your brain around risk.
Yes.
And starting to understand, oh no, that's not okay. Or you'd say something in front of someone socially and they would react in a way. When you were a teenager or you're younger, we think, oh, hang on, that hasn't quite landed. And your neural pathways would start to develop you and your sense of self as who you are, someone that can go out and play and fall out a tree and then learn, shouldn't fall out a tree. That's a bad idea. That was risky. Whereas when you've got someone constantly taking that ability to learn away from you, it does mean that your ability to manage risk and resilience isn't necessarily there. So I say this is schools of thinking as opposed to facts. Yeah. But I can certainly see how that would be true.
Trends and patterns. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That too.
And then the third bucket is around, which is an interesting one. Simon Sinek talks about this. Good old Simon Sinek. He loves to go on YouTube. Yeah, me too. He talks about this first generation, and it started with millennials really, to be given a medal for turning up.
Yes. Yes.
So you've kind of got this challenge of a group of people who are coming to work and thinking, well, haven't I been promoted yet? And why am I? I'm here. Why haven't I done better? So you've kind of got, if you take those 3 buckets, you go low self-esteem, I should be doing better, everyone else is. Ability to manage risk and manage resilience. And then well, hang on, I've shown up. Why am I not getting more? It can start to spiral. And the thing that I don't like, that I saw a lot, and I must confess I struggled sometimes with, is pointing the finger. So going, oh, that generation, they can't cope. It doesn't help us solve the challenge.
No,
it really doesn't.
No.
What we need to do is have empathy for them, that what we're talking about here is potentially pathways that we had that they don't have. And there'll be other things that they've got that we haven't got. I think Gen Z's boundaries are much better than the generations that came before them.
Yes.
And we could take some lessons from them.
Massively.
But what we do need to do is realise, as I said earlier on, this is the next generation of leaders. So we can point the finger and say, oh, you can't cope, or we can help them learn how to cope. And I think that's what, for me, leaders need support in training for. Another stat I'll just throw at you, and I can't remember the exact figures here, but I think on the Burnout Report UK, it talks about the propensity for Gen Zs to talk to their leaders about how they're feeling. And I think it went down from 70-odd% to 50-odd% in a year.
Wow.
And I do think that cancel culture has something to play in that. But also what it was insinuated from the report I read was that they don't feel that the leaders have the capabilities to support them. So we've got the situation where leaders don't feel like they've got the capabilities to support. And so they're getting burnt out. They've got more pressure coming from both ways. They don't feel like they've got the capability to support. And then these guys don't feel like they've got the ability to support, and they don't want to talk to them about it. So we've got a sort of slightly self-fulfilling prophecy between the two groups.
It just perpetuates. I've just finished reading Brené Brown's new book, Strong Ground. And she talks about how leaders have to diagnose the system, not the individual. So it's not individuals being difficult, it's something in the system that's not working. So broaden your investigation skills and become like Inspector Clouseau, and be like, what conditions have we put in place here that have enabled this, and to take responsibility for that, because we talk frankly about whole person, whole system approach, and that leaders need to really embody that. And the whole person side of that is what you've just said, which is that leaders feel like they need to solve everything, makes those conversations feel really uncomfortable, because they feel, well, what am I supposed to do about it? And it's like nothing. You just need to show up and be willing to listen and learn how to be empathetic and support that person to figure it out for themselves, which is why I think coaching cultures do so well in this space. Because if you've got people who know how to, that thing about boundaries and leaving the doing and the responsibility with the people that need to do it, and taking responsibility for what's yours if it's in the system, becomes a lot easier.
I agree. I mean, I talk about this quite a bit as well. Leaders, there's actually 3 types of leadership styles that are most correlated with burnout going down. One is around being a sort of empathetic, self-aware. So I can't remember the words for them. I'm going to just tell you the things because I know those. So under one bucket, you've got a leader that's very empathetic and very self-aware. Another bucket is about challenging, but in a really kind of inspirational way. And then the last one is kind of around making sure that you're serving your team. So it's
servant
leaders. That's the one. Thank you. Servant leaders. And they're the 3 that are most associated, again, we see, with engagement going up and burnout going down. So although there is a time and a place sometimes for coercive leadership in things like turnaround, and I think you and I experienced that when we both worked at the Big Red. But the problem with that is, as an example, is it went on for too long, so then it starts to become feeling like you're being hammered, right? Yeah. So there is a time and a different place for different leadership styles, but what we're seeing is that in particular, those 3 leadership styles, they raise engagement. So who has been trained on those leadership styles? Do they understand what that means? If you're not naturally self-aware, then you can, I believe, fervently be taught that skill, but it is a skill.
Yeah. And if you're not self-aware, you've got some blind spots that are going to be playing out that you might want to become aware of, I think. Yeah. Okay, what can organisations and leaders do then to support creating better conditions for people, particularly around burnout?
Yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to leaders, the first thing I mentioned, which I've mentioned a lot already, is around training. So investing in training and actually looking at those different leadership styles and building leadership training around those different styles. So not just thinking, so I've been on some bad leadership courses and I've been on some really epic ones, but thinking about that very clear understanding of what they think, what a good leader will do from a primary care point of view. So stop thinking about, I've got a hypo and we're going to put them through a course. And to your point, start putting everyone through that course. For me, I feel really, and I genuinely feel really fortunate that I started off in retail when I was 18. And because it was a fairly grassroots role, I started to be put through leadership training at the age of 19. And it was good leadership training. Yeah. And it was iterative. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one big program. It can just be built into everything that you do, that we train all our people with leadership qualities so that they have the skills and the resources as they move from that, exactly as you pointed out, from that, single contributor role to a bigger role. And then to the second training I'll talk about is for our younger cohort. So I think it is actually an organisation's responsibility to do training on resilience with their team members, to be able to talk about experiences that they've had and what they did about it, to be able to, in group forums, discuss what resilience looks like, or how do I become resilient, what experiences have I had that might help me here. And it's starting to realise that and bring it into the sort of forefront, as well as thinking about, okay, what else might I need to think about if I start to find work stressful?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. It doesn't have to be billed as, burnout training, but it's making sure that they're aware of the signs of burnout and aware of things that you can do to manage these things. Because when you're in the workplace, mum and dad are not there, and they're not going to helicopter buzz around you, and neither's your boss.
Yeah. And to build on that, interestingly, I've worked with a couple of clients recently who are going to be doing some developmental training work with their people that will address resilience, boundaries, difficult conversations, but they're doing it under the motivation of trying to create a specific workplace culture. So they recognize that there are some behavioral stuff going on in their system that they, as a leadership team, take responsibility for. Their values aren't as clear as they could be. There isn't a behaviour framework attached to those values, so they don't exist in a lively way in their ecosystem. Expectations haven't been set clearly about what's okay, what's not okay from a leadership perspective. So people are very, very good at doing of their job or their area of specialism, but they haven't been given a kind of a leadership expectation framework. I think that's one way in for organisations as well. 100%. Like you say, to not call it burnout, but to kind of just step back and go, well, are we experiencing burnout? What's our engagement levels like? What kind of culture do we want to create here? What conversations do we then need to have with our people to create some change?
Yeah, well, that brings me on to the third thing on my list of what you can do as a leader, which is workplace design and designing it mindfully. So I do a lot of work in kind of high performance teams, and there's the model that I use, which has kind of 5 elements to it, which is things like what's our purpose, what are our roles and responsibilities. You'll know all those models. But at the moment they get used thinking about it from a high performance point of view. But I think we need to consider thinking about it from a primary care point of view. And if you do your primary care, you get high performance. There's so many reports on the cost of burnout, by the way, and there's a human cost and there is an actual cost.
Yeah.
Just different reports say different things. One that I use says it's around $1 billion every year in just people taking time off work, and then $9 billion in lost productivity. And just because we're getting this quiet quitting effect or not being able to concentrate, so productivity is going down. So I think if we're looking at the workplace design, it's worth investing in. And it is things, to your point around thinking about roles and responsibilities, thinking about our purpose, thinking about how we're training our people, thinking about behaviours, like what do we stand for, what are our values, thinking about psychological safety and how we can build it, which is absolutely foundational to a culture that doesn't get burnout. So all those things need to be considered. And where I used to find it frustrating, both in the corporate world and to a degree as a consultant, is I think a lot of people think, it should just happen. And it doesn't. When you actually do invest in designing your team culture, when you do that, the results are so clear and they trickle down for years to come. But for me, it's primary care.
Yeah. And I've had that quite a few times with clients, and I said, well, yes, it does, but it's happening unconsciously. You're not consciously creating. So you will have a culture. There's what you say should happen around here, and then there's what actually happens. That difference between have a consciously designed environment versus like a kind of wild animal that's just kind of self-fulfilling itself.
And co-created and designed environment. You'll get people incredibly engaged when they're co-creating their purpose or co-creating their values, and it's easier to hold them to account when you're doing that as well. Have I got time for 3 more?
Yeah, go on.
So I think burnout monitoring matters.
Yeah.
So people being aware of what the signs are of burnout. It's incredibly important to understand that there are physical symptoms, there are emotional symptoms, and there are mental symptoms. So if you're seeing someone and it feels like they're kind of vacant at work or they're irritable, then it's worth checking on them. And if everyone knows what the signs of burnout are, you can be aware and monitoring yourself and monitoring your colleagues. So I can see that all the way through to literally monitoring, where you can do sort of burnout surveys to see how people are feeling and getting sentiment analysis there. I think that's really important, and I think organisations need to start implementing that as we see this trend go up. if they want to start tackling it.
Yeah.
And then the next one is around recognition. And this was one that I always found funny in the corporate world anyway, because I didn't love getting awards. I used to find stuff like that really quite embarrassing. And some people do, and there's no judgment. It's just for me, I didn't enjoy it. But I think what we're seeing through that kind of training, through that coaching culture which is really important, is an inability to feedback. That I see that again and again and again, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So teaching people how to feedback and teaching people the 1 to 5 rule, which I'm sure you know what that is, which is for every kind of bit of feedback that you give that's developmental, you should give 5 bits of motivational feedback.
Yeah.
And there's facts behind that. Yeah. There's facts behind that. So giving people that type of feedback is proven to get better results and make them feel better than constantly pummeling them with negative feedback.
Yeah.
When we talk about recognition and reward, that's what really actually motivates people. So there's plenty of evidence that shows that type of constant, making sure you're having one-to-ones, making sure you're doing end-of-year reviews, making sure that you're giving that actual feedback, it has a huge impact on your culture. It starts to create a psychologically safe culture as long as it's done in the right way. And Kim Scott's radical candor matrix is one that we talk about a lot around how you do it in the right way. But that has a huge impact. So recognition and reward programs are fine, but teach your people how to feedback to give recognition and reward.
Essential
That's
skills.
absolutely key. Yeah. And that, again, we know that if you have that essential skill, the propensity for people to burn out goes down. And then the last one's connection. So being able to create the time for your team to connect doesn't necessarily mean a tug of war. One small thing I used to just do at the beginning of all team meetings was ask for the 3 highs and the 3 lows from the last quarter, if we're doing a quarterly offsite or something.
Yeah.
And I'd give it, an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the size of the team, just to do that.
Yeah.
And it was really cathartic for people. It made you closer. It made you realize what's going on in people's lives, as well as what's going on at work. That is about connection. And when you foster that, you can then have people that you talk to, and you don't have to do that emotional energy of coming in and pretending you're okay when you've got those allies there that you can talk to about it. So those are the main things around what leaders can do.
And they're all brilliant. And I'm a big fan of the check-in. We're like, how are you arriving? So we know what we've got in the room. Yeah. Even that I think is a really lovely thing to do around burnout. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So given everything that we've talked about, this podcast obviously is aimed at leaders at all levels, in all contexts. And so if they're like, one thing should I take away from this, which is like a good place to start?
If you are a leader and you don't know where to start and you're feeling a bit lost, I would say look to people in or out of your organisation that you think and feel are good leaders, and then ask them to mentor you. They can only say no.
Yeah, I love that. Create a safe space for yourself so that you can create a safe space for others. Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Kayleigh. I've really loved this conversation. I know that you and I could talk for days about burnout and well-being in the workplace. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom so graciously.
Yeah, and like you said, I could have carried on talking for another hour. I'd say thank you very much.
We'll do a part 2 at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
Stay safe, lovely.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, thanks. Bye.